Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this roundtable discussion with the philosophical title, To Gauge or Not to Gauge, What Unified Paradigm to Assess Sustainable Use of Outer Space. My name is Marco Aliberti. I'm Associate Manager and Lead of International Engagement at the European Space Policy Institute, Vienna, and today I'll have the pleasure to serve as the moderator of this roundtable. So, as the title suggests, the logic of this roundtable discussion, which I would like to keep as interactive as possible, is basically to explore the prospects of, so the challenges and also opportunities of crafting common, internationally shared approach to define, assess, and tackle space sustainability issues by focusing in particular on the concept of the orbital carrying capacity, which was a concept discussed throughout the year by the Net Zero Space Working Group. So let's maybe start with a positive or encouraging note, and we cannot deny that space sustainability is gaining increasing momentum, as for instance evidenced by the proliferation of so many initiatives at international levels that are focusing on it. And we can mention here, for instance, first and foremost, the Net Zero Space Initiative, which gathers us today, but also the Space Sustainability Rating, and we have a representative here talking, but also the Astra Carta by the Sustainable Market Initiative launched last June, and the brand new, basically, ESA Zero Debris Charter, and also the Protect Accelerator. Now, it is certainly pleasing to see, the proliferation of so many initiatives, because these underpin, that there is increasing awareness, and there is eagerness, basically, to act. We cannot deny that we still, at the same time, miss a sort of internet consensus or shared understanding of what space sustainability is in the first place, and this is quite fundamental. And then what are the concrete indicators, that could be used to assess it, and why it would be important to have concrete, tangible, maybe data-driven indicators to assess it, because as suggested, by Professor Harold James with regard to climate change, data-driven models, data-based metrics are the secret sauce of multilateral solutions, thereby if we are not able to measure, phenomena or problems, those problems will remain bad abstractions that will fuel basically recrimination and tensions. And therefore, global issue will continue to be dragged into blame game spiral. And this is not something actually that we want. In our community, against this background, one of the approaches that is gaining a little bit more traction is that of the orbital carrying capacity that was actually discussed by the Net Zero Working Group throughout the year. However, we still have many questions, to answer if we want to turn the orbital carrying capacity concept into something more, than a concept. For instance, first of all, what are we talking about? What is the definition of orbital carrying capacity? Second, for instance, what variable from a technical perspective should be factored in, for its modeling, but also, how to factor in again or embed or take into account the evolving nature of space technologies, but also how do we achieve, scientific, technical, but also political consensus on this matter at the international level. Now, to address these and other pressing questions, today I have the pleasure to moderate actually a terrific lineup of speakers. So let me immediately welcome and thank Jan Christensen, Director of Private Sector Programs at Secure War Foundations. Then I go in this line, Emmanuel David, Executive Director at PFL Space Center, Space, Miguel Angel Molina Cobos, Deputy Director Manager and Chairman and Space Council at GMV, then Dr. Quentin Verspieren, Protect Accelerator at the European Space Agency, John Jenka, Chief Executive Officer for Global and Regulatory Affairs at Viasat, and then Amber Charlesworth, Head of Space Spectrum Policy at Amazon. Welcome and thank you, everyone. So what I would like to do in this roundtable, in practical terms, I would like to have maybe a first round of introductory remarks by our speaker on the topic of basically how do we assess space sustainability? What is space sustainability? How do we assess it? Followed by a short moderated moderated discussions, including the other speakers. And then I would like to have a second, set of remarks guided by the topic of how do we get international consensus, and how do we move forward. Also followed by a moderated discussion and also some engagement actually with the audience, hopefully. So let me start maybe with the first part, immediately with Ian, since Secure World is an organization that is specifically dedicated to address space sustainability in its many different assets. Please, Ian, you have the floor.
Yeah, well, thank you, Marco, and thank you to the assembled audience and participants here for joining us at the end of a very long and interesting day for a hopefully very interesting but not long discussion of an important topic here. Secure World Foundation, as Marco mentioned, is an organization solely focused on space sustainability. We are a nonprofit based out of the United States. We've focused on cooperative dialogues for space sustainability for about 20 years now. So I'd like to say we were doing space sustainability before space sustainability was a thing. I want to just start with what is the definition of space sustainability? So I think we all know vaguely or kind of generally what that term means, but we probably each have our own associations with that. So for Secure World Foundation, space sustainability refers to the collective ability to operate in and benefit from a stable orbital environment. So the actions we take to maintain orbital stability, but importantly for the benefit. It's not just for the stability of the environment itself, it's so that we can use and access that environment. So earlier today there was a fantastic panel downstairs, fantastic discussion downstairs about Global South participation in space activities, and a lot of that focused on the benefit. And so it's good to remind us that when we have conversations like that, it's so that we can benefit from space applications. So we're seeing change in the way we use the space environment right now, and that requires new approaches to the way that we assess and mitigate risks. One example of that change is the emergence of large LEO constellations, which offer new and expanded access to societal benefits from space technology and space activities. But they also pose a number of unique regulatory and space sustainability challenges. Regulatory processes were largely designed to administer spectrum access, coordination, and interference matters, and separately from that, space debris mitigation. They weren't really designed to administer or oversee the type of constellations that are being deployed now. So between June 22 and February of this year, Secure World, working with a number of partners, including SB, convened a series of workshops in which we convened regulators to have a regulator-to-regulator dialogue around these challenges, and in particular focus on orbital carrying capacity. These workshops were held in London, in Paris, and in Vienna, and we had participation from both the spectrum part of the process, part of the system, and the space environment part of the system. And so what I want to do in the next few minutes is kind of go through what we heard from regulators in these dialogues about this concept of orbital carrying capacity and see how that relates to the work that we're doing in the working group here. I just want to start with Secure World's perspective on carrying capacity. We believe that carrying capacity can be part of a collective response to improving space sustainability, but is not the complete solution. So for Secure World, again, space sustainability is a spectrum of no pun intended, a spectrum of issues. Carrying capacity is part of that, but we need a broader set of solutions. As part of that, we need to shift from not just thinking about orbital debris mitigation, but thinking broader about space environmental management. Carrying capacity can be a tool to help us do that. We need to look at a bigger picture, develop more holistic approaches to managing the space environment. However, we're also to be mindful of the time frame. So a long-term, say 200 view of the environment might obscure or look differently than a look at our short-term space safety impacts. So we need to consider both of these time frames in our management approaches. We believe we're very unlikely to ever get to a specific number to cap satellites at in any orbit. Different orbital regimes, different uses have different implications, and design and operations factors influence capacity. And we're very likely to have different models with different conceptual approaches and models that need to take behavior into account. So simply setting a limit may not produce the desired results. So from a policy standpoint, the question we wanted to ask is how do you build interoperability between carrying capacity models and how do you communicate uncertainties around them? So as I said, we convened a series of dialogues. Out of these dialogues, they were convened under Chatham House rule, of course. There are summary reports that we've produced, but some of the key takeaways. Most of the regulators acknowledged that political leadership above the regulator level at the leadership level would be needed to implement any sort of large-scale changes or updates to regulatory practice to maybe use carrying capacity in that way. So recognition that large constellations are and will be deployed before carrying capacity concepts are fit for purpose for application to regulation. So we know these constellations are flying now, so how does this tool fit in? A very interesting part of that discussion that came out was the application of carrying capacity tools potentially to the supervision part of licensing more so than the authorization part. So how could carrying capacity potentially be used as a tool to monitor how companies are performing to licensing conditions? There's discussion of using carrying capacity to help regulators distinguish the operational relationship of constellations and space activities to the long-term space environment compared to the collision risk to existing space debris. Recognition from our community of regulators that the most effective and most likely way that any sort of regulations for these large constellations would be done at the national level with ideally some coordinated themes and principles across at the international level. And just a couple of barriers that came up in terms of how regulators may or may not be able to use this tool. A number of our regulators told us that they have limitations or prohibitions against using third-party models, so that if there was a tool or set of reference models out there for carrying capacity, they would have to validate those against internal tools. And then, of course, the issue of capacity, not carrying capacity, but financial and human resource capacity within regulators to come up to speed on new tools and new processes. And then lastly, I just want to leave a key theme that came through all of these dialogues was the role that equity considerations of equity to access to orbit for both emerging countries and for the up-and-coming space generation should play in the management of capacity in the future. So we saw that as a very driving concern amongst regulators. So I know I maybe spoke a little longer than I probably was allotted, so apologies, and I'll yield time back later.
A lot of interesting elements indeed where we may want to follow up, but I wanted to hear the perspective maybe of the private sector. Amber?
Great, thanks, Marco. Again, Amber Charlesworth, I lead space policy at Amazon Project Kuiper, an initiative to launch a low Earth orbit satellite constellation to provide fast and affordable broadband globally. To deliver on Kuiper's important mission to serve the global user community, we need to help protect the different environments in which we are operating. That's also on Earth as well as in space. The Project Kuiper team has prioritized space safety from day one and uses these principles to have influenced every aspect of our satellite network, from satellite design and operational plans to the architecture of our constellation itself. My colleague was on a panel earlier and went into great depth on our best practices for the responsible use of space, so I will not use everybody's time here to go through those at great length. But I did want to say that space sustainability certainly is important to us. I think it's important to everybody here. Thanks to the audience for showing up late afternoon on a Saturday, as well as my colleagues on this roundtable. I think that shows our dedication to this important topic, regardless of how we decide to move ahead with the Net Zero Space Initiative, which we're also proud to be a part of as of last year. And I'll just echo what Marco said. The meetings for the working group on carrying capacity have been insightful. They've brought together many, many experts, and we've had some very productive conversations. I think we all can agree, and we have consensus on the importance of space sustainability. Where we differ is what the near-term approach looks like to address and mitigate the risks of the increased volume of space activities. And so while we didn't come to consensus this year, and I can talk through our view on carrying capacity as well as kind of best practices for the responsible use of space, I think we have a really good opportunity to kind of refine our working methods for the next year, meet a little more often, maybe earlier in the year, perhaps in person, so we can continue to make some progress here and come up with some consensus-based concrete approaches for the next Paris Peace Forum. And then I will go, just following Ian's example or model here, I'll go a little bit into our view of carrying capacity and can also yield time back at the end as well. We've said this a number of times in the working group, but I'll repeat it again today. At this time, it would be impossible to develop a consensus-based, technically valid definition and equation to determine the capacity of the LEO orbital environment, given that satellite design, manufacturing, technology is still advancing and operational best practices continue to emerge and develop. Rather than producing a specific carrying capacity number in the abstract, we should focus on reaching consensus on concrete measures like operational best practices as the best near-term step to protecting the outer space environment. We should also encourage appropriate technical interchange and coordination between operators, recognizing that future policy and technology developments will allow for the possibility of closer space operations. For future levels of proposed satellite populations, improvements in navigation, constellation design, and operator coordination are needed. To draw a comparison, increasing highway safety does not depend on limiting the number of cars that access a road, but rather on technology and policy improvements that help ensure on-road safety. We can take a similar approach here, continuing to build out technologies and operating practices that increase operational safety. We've provided in a submission to the Paris Peace Forum a number of best practices that we view are gaining broad agreement within the international community. One would be satellites should have a way to be tracked. Satellites operating above 400 kilometers, that's where human space flight begins, should have effective maneuverable capability. As well as satellite operators need to be more transparent, open on where their ephemeris data is, and they should leverage to the maximum extent possible government and industry SSA services to ensure broad coordination with other operators. These are just three of many best practices that we could come up with that would improve the number of satellites and activity that could take place safely in the low Earth orbit. I'll stop there. Again, I've said this a number of times before, but appreciate the time here, Marco, and Jerome, if he's around, appreciate your leadership in this ongoing work. Thanks.
Thank you, Amber. A lot of also interesting points here. One specific point maybe that I wanted to use as a point of reflections involving everyone is basically these relations, best practices versus orbital carrying capacities. Are they mutually exclusive? Maybe this is a point actually we can have start the moderating discussion with. I think it's a very important point raised by Amber. And I also wanted now to give the floor for some introductory remarks to Miguel Angel. Please, you have the floor.
Okay, it's working, okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for everybody to be here in the last session of the last day. And it's really a pleasure to be here and share with you this topic, which is a complex thing that we are facing, because the question to assess the sustainability of the use of the outer space is something which is complex. It's obviously complex because we are here discussing for this, but it's also crucial. I want to highlight how crucial is this point because of the increasing activities and interest that we have today in space exploration and space exploitation. And now developing a paradigm that is valid for everyone and needs use for this, to the control of this access, is obvious that it's not easy. I want to highlight some of the factors that we should take into account. This is a good summary of the points that you should consider. First, we are talking about a multidimensional problem. Here we are talking about environmental impact, technological sustainability, economic considerations, and geopolitical implications. If you put everything together, it's obvious that we are facing a big problem. As the first thing, we need to consider international collaboration. This is not a problem for a single country. This is not a problem for a single company. We are talking for a problem that with multiple countries, very different countries, European Union, Russia, China, USA, then it's obvious that the problem is even bigger than what we considered at the beginning, and different type of organization involved in this aspect. But again, there is behind the problem, there is an impact in the environment that we are considering. There is an impact for the space debris generation. This is something we are more or less now again aware about this problem. But also the contamination of the celestial bodies. We already started with the moon, and we will do it because we are humans, and the humans are doing this. Then it's something that we need to control. It's obvious. Now, also the technological evolution which is behind. We need to encourage the evolution of our technology, but we need to try to minimize the use of the resources. We tend to promote energy efficiency and support long-term sustainability. There are obvious words that I am saying, but we don't need to forget it when we are going into space. Also, there are legal and ethical considerations. There are laws, rules that we need to put in place, agreements and governance between the different people involved. And again, I want to come back to the countries, which is not something we need to forget. We will not be easy. And also, flexibility and adaptability. We are living in a world, and particularly the technology behind space, which is evolving a lot. Then we need to set something that is flexible and adaptable for the future. And it's something which is rigid and limiting the access that we were considering. Let me finish with two more things. First, the public engagement and education, the public awareness and understanding of the space activity is something which is also needed. Everybody needs to know what we are doing, and everybody needs to know the problems behind this. And, of course, the problem with a long-term perspective. What we have in mind and we have in our hands is not for now. It's for our future, for the new people that will come, and we need to keep the space available for them, because if not, they will not be able to move from the Earth. Then finally, we'll put the summary of everything. The problem is we are looking for something which will be comprehensive, internationally applicable, environmentally consistent, technologically innovative, legally and ethically grounded, and adaptable and forward-looking. Not easy.
Thank you, Miguel Angel. Indeed, and you kept the spirit of the title, you know, and you pointed out, indeed, that to many philosophical and fundamental issues. I did also like, I would say that you acknowledge the multidimensional nature of the problem. So also a question, follow-up question is, how do we unpack this complexity, you know, and how do we tackle? And also that you echoed actually also the perspective, you know, how do we reconcile? And this is actually a point for the reflection, you know, short-term, you know, with long-term interest, you know, because this is also not an easy. I maybe actually wanted to start a quick, you know, roundtable with all participants, you know, on what has been discussed so far. And maybe I wanted to start out with what was mentioned here, you know. There are multiple ways to address space sustainability, you know. How are they mutually incompatible or can be pushed forward together, and should these be put forward together? And I also want to echo what was raised before in a previous panel, you know, do we need to accept polycentricity here when it comes to space sustainability? So I don't know who wants to take the floor. Yes, please, John.
Thank you, Marco. You know, I was struck recently by a comment that Marie Bajah made in one of our working sessions. I'm going to try to get it right, so apologies to Marie if I slightly misquote. But he said, you know, the problem with relying on best practices is it relies on altruistic motives. And the problem that we face in space is not caused by folks with altruistic motives. There are a lot of responsible approaches to space, and I'm sure there will continue to be, but the problem that we're seeing, which is increasing congestion, increasing numbers of conjunctions, and something that indicates that the law of large numbers is going to catch up with us, because very small risk events start to turn into near certainties of disaster given enough chances. So that really struck me when Mariba said that, and I want to come back in some of my comments later. This group agreed that we needed concrete regulatory action in the working group process last year, and I'll come back to that. I don't think we should lose sight of that.
Thank you, John. Please, Quentin.
Thank you very much, Marco, for the introduction, and the other speakers. So I'm Quentin Verspiren from the European Space Agency. I would say that the fact that we talk about sustainability and the need for guidelines, best practices, shows that everything is based on the assumption that there are limits to the environment. So consequently, yes, there is a kind of tolerable capacity of the environment that we should think about and we should try to conceptualize. Now, is it carrying capacity, orbital capacity, environmental capacity? Is it defined with definition A, B, C, or D? Is something that will take probably years to agree on. But what is the key, I think, is that we should not fall into the immediate trap that capacity means a number of satellites. Definitely, this is an approach that at ESA we don't believe in. You can have 10 satellites behaving in a very hazardous way and 100,000 behaving in a totally risk-averse way. And so this capacity should not be, I would say, based on a fixed guideline or fixed number approach, but on a fixed risk approach. And where we bring the concept of environmental capacity, I will use this word, although, as you understood, I don't like any of the terminologies necessarily, is that we tended, so first we had this fixed guideline approach that was, I think, shown by this obsession that we sometimes have in the case of, let's say, post-mission disposal. Is it 25? Is it 10? Is it 5? Our view at ESA is that we shouldn't care about whether it's 25, 10, or 5. At the first step for this specific mission, is it acceptable for the risk that this mission poses on other missions and on the environment itself, that it stays 10, 5, or 25? Now, there are some missions that can say 25 years, and they will not cause much risk, and some that even if you leave them 2 years, can be absolutely dramatic. So I think we first move from this fixed guideline approach to the fixed risk approach. And then we need to move from, let's say, the fixed risk at individual mission from a fixed risk at environmental level, so this aggregated risk. And this is of utmost complexity, and I can just share, I was chatting before coming with some of my colleagues at ESA who are working on that full-time, and I don't think that before 3 or 4 years we'll have the perfect answer on that. And to join the comment of Ian before, even if it already takes a few years to develop the right methodologies, there is not necessarily a way to say that one of the methodologies is better than another, and we'll need additional effort to try to see convergence on that. But so I wanted basically to take probably too long time to say that I agree with Amber on the fact that it's definitely not a problem of number of satellites.
Thank you, Quentin. A very interesting thought indeed, and you also tackled actually also one of the questions that I wanted to raise, basically whether we see a tension, between an approach that is focused on, that has a holistic approach versus one that focuses on individual missions, whether do we see this sort of tension? I don't know whether you want to react on this, since, for instance, SSR, has a different approach, and basically, do you see this sort of mutual incompatibility, between a holistic, versus an approach that focuses?
Yeah, so my point of view is I think different indicators are useful and needed also, depending on who you are. Like if you're ESA and you look at the space environment in general, you maybe want to have more a system approach. If you're an operator, you concentrate maybe more on your own constellation. I think what we also need to keep in mind is what is the goal there, and
yes.
Ian also mentioned is also the use of outer space for the long term, also to keep fair access for everyone. And there I believe that everyone agrees on the purpose. And indicators there are only a mean also to get to this purpose. And I think what's most important is to show the efforts of each actors, whatever also at the end the indicator they use, but it's also that they use it also to get better. You need to know, to put a number, because you need to know where I am today, and then you reassess based on this, and then you see where I am tomorrow. And this is also what we do with the space sustainability rating. We work with operators, we give them guidelines so that they can get better. And it's not about the number you have today, if it's good or bad. It's also, am I improving tomorrow? And I think this is what we should also focus on, because we also saw from the climate change that we spend a lot of time trying to get a consensus on a number, and we are talking about this. But if we take too much time, then it's too late already. And Quentin mentioned that if 3 to 5 years to get a consensus maybe on something, but then the situation will have changed, because if we look already where we were 3 to 5 years ago, we would not have expected that the space population is as today. So we really also need to be pragmatic, and Amber will agree on that, and to find concrete solutions. And those indicators are really here to help as a mean, and not to be only like a food of thought or something academic that we all like try to get the perfect number, because it doesn't exist.
Thank you. Yes, Ian?
Two small additional interventions. I'm going to paraphrase something else Dr. Jha has said, so maybe we should make Mariba an honorary member of our roundtable today. But he said a number of times, you manage what you measure, right? So I think we want to be careful about making this dichotomy between guidelines, best practices, and a tool like carrying capacity which ultimately measures in the long term. So if you're going to set out best practice and guidelines, you need something to measure the result or the outcome or the performance of those against. And carrying capacity could potentially be a tool to do that. So I just wanted to kind of make that point. I think it was implicit in some of the things that others are saying. And then secondly, this long term, we need time to get to consensus of the models. That's true, but from our standpoint, that's why you need to be clear about interoperability and making your discussion of what is going into the models so that they can be compared and that people can understand them, so that you can potentially look at application of those even while you're waiting for a consensus to occur. So,
yeah, extremely good point. Yeah, you wanted to have a quick reaction? No. No, sorry. But you were raising your hand.
It's me. Marco,
please, Miguel.
Let me to add another variable to the discussion. It's obvious, best practice and guidelines is okay, but without regulation is nothing. Why? We are living, I can give you some numbers. In our company, we are working a lot for a long time to the space debris problem. And 5 years ago, I was doing presentations about this problem. I was saying the number of dangerous objects in the space is 50,000. Now today, we are talking about 35,000, and it's continuously increasing. Then it's obvious, it's not because, it's obvious that we are launching satellites which are not following the rules or the specific guidelines that we wanted to have. They are failing. We are not removing from the orbit that they are doing, and we are not putting the satellite in safe orbits or doing a safe re-entry. Then the problem is still there, and we are discussing all around to try to minimize the problem, but the problem is increasing. If you look for the last 5 years, how this space debris has been evolving is crazy, and we are saying that in 10 years from now, if we put together all the satellites, all the constellation that we have in mind that we want to launch, we are talking about 40,000 satellites, new satellites in space. If we are not doing something to control this, it's obvious that the problem will not be solved.
Just quick complement to that. It's not just that I think there are two issues. The guidelines are not followed first. No. Current guidelines are not necessarily the worst guideline. They're actually pretty good, but they're not being implemented by most actors. And I don't want to butcher the work of my colleagues from the debris office, but I think in the ISA environmental report, they show that around 25% of objects is in the end following generally accepted debris mitigation guidelines. But then we can also open the question of whether these guidelines are enough, and they're probably not. And this is why I will talk about that later in a short speech, but we have been working on trying to push the community to go further with stricter debris mitigation and remediation practices.
Thank you, Quentin. Let me open actually the second part since the clock is ticking. Actually, since reference was made to the years they took to get the numbers, on climate, I was wondering whether should we set at least, since multiple, approaches to space sustainability will coexist eventually, should we, as a community, set up a target, I don't know, the number of debris. We don't want, the number of debris, larger than 10 centimeters exceed, 100,000, Should we strive for this? But maybe let's take this into the second part of the discussion. I just wanted to give the floor also to our speakers. Maybe I will start with Quentin Verspieren, which is the ESA Protect Accelerator Coordinator. Please, Quentin.
So first, to answer your question, first with one sentence and then the longer paragraph. I don't want to reach 100,000. I would rather we stop producing more than what we have now. And we have the technologies and most of the technologies and the means to do it. It's just a question of how do we push towards implementation and also better competitiveness of the solutions. But so, first of all, I need to explain a bit this strange job title that I have, a Protect Accelerator Coordinator, that is absolutely impossible to understand without context. So ESA has created a series of initiatives that are called the accelerators, with the idea of making sure that the technology and the knowledge that we have inside the agency is useful and used by the community. So to really make sure that it's not just for ourselves being really proud of how we reduce debris and we have wonderful missions, but to make sure that we help the community grow towards better practices. And so there are various themes on this accelerator, and one that focusing on protecting assets on the ground and in space from space hazards called Protect. And so we deal with debris, but also with space weather services. So very concretely, in line with the Paris Peace Forum call, ESA is engaging in a profound transformation of its internal standard and practices with regards to space debris mitigation and remediation, which is a mandate that we also receive from our 22 member states, and we call that the zero debris approach, which means that we commit that to do all we can so that all our missions that will enter design phase after 2030 will not leave any debris behind. And if they leave debris, we will go and get them. That's really a clear commitment, zero debris left by our missions after 2030. And this commitment, of course, is not coming out of the blue. It's based on decades of work at ESA and in collaboration with our member state and industry on that, in particular at what we call the Space Safety Program, which is the place where ESA is, with member states are pouring resources to develop such technologies. And to give you an example of the scale, since 2019, member states have given us 1.2 billion euros for the Space Safety Program, which is the largest of such initiatives in the world. But we were also asked by member states, echoing what I said before, not just to be proud of ourselves, but to try to contribute to the community and to see how we can not only encourage, but also help first the European community, of course, being a European organization, but also beyond, to let's say, get the technologies, understand the environment, adopt better practices. And this is what we chose to implement through the Zero Debris Charter initiative that is very much in line with the principles of the Paris Peace Forum, and I'm personally working on ensuring synergies. I think it's absurd that we would develop these things in parallel. We definitely have to seek for a way to integrate our respective communities on that. And I mean, a lot of you, if not all of you in the room, maybe I hope Amazon could join, that are part of this community that has helped shape the charter. So everyone else is welcome to join. What we did with this charter is that it's a document that was completely drafted by the community. We facilitated the process only, and it contains various things, but in particular 5 targets for 2030, which are really risk targets based on, let's say, the assumption, as I was saying, that the environment has a limited capacity. We don't use the term of carrying capacity for the reason that I said, that we need more research before deeming it acceptable in such a document, but that is always in our mind. And so the idea of these targets is really to, let's say, not be prescriptive of specific approach, but just say we want practices or space sustainability in general to look like this in 2030. Then it's up to us, the industry, NGOs, to do what they know how to do, great innovation, and to choose how to realize these targets. But we don't want to prescribe any approach, because there may be a lot of good approaches that we didn't think about yet.
Thank you, Quentin. And actually, let me immediately turn to Emmanuel with another great initiative, actually, in the space sustainability rating.
Thank you
Please.
very much, and so thank you also first for the invitation, and also it's great also to be here with this great panel. So as you introduced me as from the EPFL Space Center, also today I'm talking on behalf of the Space Sustainability Rating Association in my role of Vice President of the association, and which was created actually officially last year in December 2022. So I will also get back a bit on how with SSR we assess space sustainability and how we think we have one consensus also around the definition of space sustainability. But it's really a new and innovative way to incentivize safer conditions for operating in space. The mission of the association is really to manage the rating and also to encourage space actors to design and implement sustainable and responsible space missions for the long-term sustainability of the space environment. And an emphasis here about the design of space mission and also about the word responsible, but I don't think we mentioned so much about responsibility, this topic. So what is the SSR? So it offers an acknowledgement of actions that space actors are taking to ensure safer missions. It's really an initiative, as I mentioned, to foster voluntary actions by the satellite operators to reduce the risk related to space debris and on-orbit collisions, providing first an assessment. So it's a rating system informed by a transparent database assessment of the level of sustainability of the mission, practical guidance on how to improve. So that was I was mentioning the performance and the practices. And we are a non-profit and we are an association, meaning we also provide a platform for action-focused collaboration centered on the rating system itself to support research and leverage also best practices. I want to emphasize on the voluntary aspect because one of the, I would say, observation that was made within the World Economic Forum back then it was that regulations is going too slow. So you need to have a system that people can come also on a voluntary basis and also to perform the assessment. Then in the rating system, what do you have and what are the criteria we use in our approach, in our framework? So there is a part which is called the mission index, which assesses the impact on the space environment, which can be correlated with carrying capacity, which is also code developed by the European Space Agency Space Debris Office. So the colleagues of Canton, but we also looked at other parameters. So there is the detection, identification, and tracking, so the capability of be detected, identified, tracked, the collision avoidance capabilities, the data sharing also, so how transparent operators are and if they provide also the information, the compliance to standards and guidelines, and also the capabilities to be removed or to be compatible with on-orbit servicing missions. So it's really, I would say, a complete vision and what are today the best practices, what is the best in-class behaviors of actors that you can have today concerning the in-space sustainability. So, and now also, how can this be used? So there are different policy options that we identified that could be developed along with the SSR and that regulators or national, I would say, public actors can be used, such as giving also financial and economic incentives. It can be a support also for current and potential regulations, altered procurement processes also. And also it's very important for the public perception and also for marketing and environmental and social and government style corporate reporting. So reporting is very important. I would like also to acknowledge that in the elaboration of the space sustainability rating is also the result of extensive academic work with colleagues from the MIT, UT at Austin, so Professor Daniel Wood, Maury Badja, also Bryce Technology and the ESA Space Debris Office. That was initiated at the Future Global Council for Space within the World Economic Forum, so also with a strong, I would say, industry-led momentum there. And today, in total, we performed 6 official ratings, including 3 constellations, also 3 nano to mini single satellite missions, and also the beta testing were performed with 8 actors. And we really want to include the variety of type of missions, in number of satellite, number numbers, size, but also the type of actors, academic, industry, agencies, and operator geographic origin. We really want to be inclusive and diverse in the approach of the SSR. So I'll conclude now just to say that the SSR, we really act to implement sustainable and responsible space mission for the long-term sustainability of the space environment. Our mission is really to support actors in the industry to turn their commitment into real action by using a performance tool. It's a performance tool demonstrating their effort, and we really hope to continue our collaboration with the governments, policymakers, and also looking toward connecting and collaborating with participants today, and this was already the case. I had the opportunity since early in the morning today. Thanks.
Thank you, Manuel. Just a last maybe take from an introductory take, because we are late, from John, please.
Thank you, Marco. First of all, I think it's really good that we're having a frank discussion like this. You know, there are different views, and I think it's important that people are able to express them, regardless of whether everyone agrees with each other. I have a different perspective. The engineering college within my university has a motto: if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And I'm disappointed and concerned, I speak on behalf of the company, that despite Jerome's best efforts this year, the working group process hasn't really embraced that philosophy. And I want to explain why. I went back and I looked at the working group report from last year, and here are two quotes. If you bear with me, I'm going to read them. Number one, a better understanding of the risk of collision in orbit is of utmost importance to ensure concrete actions from regulatory authorities. For instance, with regard to the way in which they evaluate the safety of new assets at the licensing stage and secure the development of a prosperous and sustainable market. End quote. Second statement, and I quote, the state of the art does allow, I want to repeat that, the state of the art does allow a numerical approximation of the aggregate risk posed by each new system in the total environment. A year later, this group has really nothing to show but more talk and reasons to delay taking tangible actions to tackle the existential threat we face because of how mankind is populating space. And in the meantime, experts at MIT have developed a model for better understanding collision risk, and they urge that that model be used as a basis for developing a governance process for space, explaining the attractive features of the model, including low computational cost, simplicity, accessibility, and generality. I want to say, if we were addressing cancer, we'd not drag our feet, bemoan that science doesn't have all the answers about what causes cancer or how to cure it. We'd keep pressing forward with a solution. We'd use the tools we have at hand, and we'd continue to improve them. And we'd do that even if everyone did not agree. The same is true for climate change. I'd be willing to bet you that the Paris Peace Forum would not invite me back if I said we should stop fighting climate change because there's some scientific uncertainty and disagreement on the issue. There is always scientific uncertainty. That's the nature of science. We learn, we apply what we've learned, and then we continue to learn and adapt. I believe we must move forward with tangible and effective recommendations that go beyond mere talk. That means developing better governance tools and using the tools we already have to empirically evaluate both collision risk on a holistic basis and the most efficient and effective ways to mitigate that risk, so we all can prosper from safe and reliable access to space. My last comment may be a little provocative for 5 o'clock on a Saturday, but I'll leave you with this thought. Why is there no progress? One theory, some people may already understand that the aggregate collision risk from the way space is being populated is unacceptably high, and they may fear what happens once it is visible and known to the world.
Thank you, John. But we like actually provocative. I mean, this is the scope of the roundtable, actually, to exchange ideas. And you mentioned basically the need, and this is also a question that I want everyone to address here, you know, the need for better governance tools, you know. Yes, I will give you immediately the floor. No, just let me moderate a bit. How do we actually, you know, move forward? You know, how do we square the circle then? You know, okay, let's accept we have this coexistence, you know, of multiple approaches and tools that is not mutually exclusive, you know, but how do we ensure, you know, progress actually on those matters, you know? And also, you know, since we still have 10 minutes and I also wanted to involve the audience here, do you think there is a need, because there was also pointed out as part of the discussion, of creating or an international panel of experts, you know, or be it formal or informal panel of experts actually to reduce, you know, the scientific uncertainty, you know, and discuss those matters, you know, whether and create a sort of convergence, you know, on the, I would say, what we can call a common approach. Please, Amber.
Thank you, Marco. I just wanted to respond to some of the comments made by my colleagues earlier. And I just would start my remarks with saying I don't believe anybody has more incentive to ensure the sustainability of space than LEO operators. We've invested over $10 billion to provide a critical service. Over 2.6 billion people across the world are not connected, and we will provide that service, and we're going to provide it reliably and affordably. So we're not just putting satellites up just to put satellites up. This is a critical service, and it's a need across the globe. The second thing I will say is this. We became a member last year. There was a previous year of work that took place with a very limited number of members, and they were very easy to shape their documents in a way that aligned with their business model and their competitive needs. Now, I've come in here and talked as a LEO operator who understands the LEO environment on what it means to provide tangible next steps to improve space sustainability, and have proposed that as the next near-term step, we should focus on best practices. And as those best practices emerge, as I talked about before, we can see where there's broader consensus, and we can look at more concrete measures. That already being trackability, that already being maneuverability, that already being transparent and providing ephemeris data. So there's a number of approaches. I don't think anyone here, in fact, I take great offense, is suggesting for 2 seconds that they want to just launch satellites up to see a fireworks show in low Earth orbit. In fact, I think they're saying exactly the opposite. We've invested over $10 billion, and the environment that exists today better exists tomorrow, or we cannot provide this important mission, and we've now lost over $10 billion. What we're disagreeing on is the near-term approach forward. What does that look like? As we build best practices, we're able to better see how many operators can operate and how many objects can be in low Earth orbit safely. And until we come up with those best practices and we agree on those, it would be impossible in the abstract to pluck a number out of the air, regardless of the inputs. That number that works today will not work tomorrow as space safety advances and the technology advances moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Amber. You want to take the floor on this? Otherwise, actually, I wanted you, Quentin, and Emmanuel, actually, to address the question that I had before, you know, how do we internationalize, you know, or we create, you know, expand consensus or, you know, convergence, you know, either on SSR or the zero debris approach of ESA, you know. Yeah. So what is your take, you know?
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think it's a great question, and consensus building coming from with a Swiss background is really at the core of our culture, and I think it's we can also look about John mentioned the climate change, and we can also, I think we should also learn from what happened with the IPCC, which was created, I think now it's more than 30 years ago, and really it took a long time to get to I would say maybe a consensus that is still discussed today. So I believe that while you still want to continue the discussion, like the consensus building discussion, I think the most important part of it is to better understand each other. And that's also what Ian was proposing. And I also understand that from a region to a region, everyone wants to have their own model, their own database, and their own understanding on the space environment. And I think most important is also to exchange, to understand, to see on which data people are taking decisions, and then to agree that is acceptable, yes or not, and maybe to translate also from one region to another region how they act. I would say international panel of experts, there is also the IADC, which is a panel of experts that came out also with standards, and they have a process that works also well. I would also mention that if there should be also such a panel of experts, it should be also maybe expand to a more interdisciplinary approach also. So there is the scientific community that have really one vision of what is like in-space sustainability, which is very much focused around safety, around collision risk, and which is correct, because Amber mentioned when you invest 10 billion in a constellation, you want it to be safe. So it's one aspect of sustainability, but sustainability has much more, I would say, dimensions, like for inclusions, for diversity also of actors, fairness also for the long-term use of outer space. And maybe this is a part that is missing today. But while this is set up, we need to be pragmatic and to seize the sense of urgency. I think the comment of John was right. We are every day at the edge of a catastrophic collision that will make us lose access to space-based infrastructure. And I don't think it's a word we want to it's not a crisis we want to face. Today we have enough crises to face as a humanity.
No, I would say that saying that there is no consensus in the community on the fact that we need to act is not true. And I mean, John, frankly, you've been part of this process for our charter, and you know very well that the assumption when we started that was that we develop a document that we want to be more ambitious than anything else that exists in terms of figures, in terms of guideline, and that we do it in a completely open and collaborative way, which was a huge risk, because we were assuming that everyone agreed and that no one would fight back to decrease the figures. And we didn't refuse a single organization. We had 100 organizations registering. We had on average 40 participating. Everyone could speak. Viasat was a very active participant, and thank you for that. And there was not a single comment. You can ask Alessandra, who was there. There was never a single comment that was denying the fact that we needed to act, and even more than that, there was never a single comment that were telling us 99% of PMD is too much. It was extremely ambitious, and the community agrees on the fact that we need to be ambitious. Now, what we need to do is concretely do it and work with everyone to do it. And on that, I agree 100% with what Emmanuel was saying, that yes, there is the IADC. It's a great thing. From ESA, I will never say that the IADC is not good. It's an amazing organization that does a great job. There are industry platforms there. What we need to do now, and that's what we try to do with this initiative, the charter, is that we want the agencies, the private companies, the NGOs of all sizes, of all countries, to be working together. Because it's not an industry problem, it's not a government problem. But frankly, on the fact that there is a consensus, I'm convinced of that. And really, we had an open process, and no one complained about any of the ambitious targets that we suggest to set. And in that sense, it's very different from the environment. And I think to give an additional argument, what Amber was saying, I don't see any businessman putting, whether that's a few millions or a few billions, in a business that is at risk. At least it's first-hand experience. Yes.
20 seconds. For me, the problem is the others. It's obvious the compromise of Amazon. It's obvious what ESA is saying. They want to have something safe and sustainable. But what about the others? What do we do with other countries which are not involved in these commitments? How you will control, there are no Chinese, I guess. China or Russia in this play. And now, don't forget the geopolitical situation we are living. We are in war. We have wars in Ukraine and Israel. How many satellites we are launching today to make picture of Kiev and to make picture of Gaza, and we don't know how safe they are. This is the issue for me, the international approach and to put everybody together.
Thank you, Miguel. John.
So maybe I looked at the words I read. I didn't say no one's acting or we shouldn't act. My comments were all with respect to the charter of this working group, which has been for 2 years developing the carrying capacity concept. I am fully supportive of all of the excellent work that's been done by many folks around the room, so please don't misconstrue me. My concern is that we had a charter, we worked for a year, we decided we needed a better understanding of collision risk in orbit. We recognize that the tools allow a numerical approximation, and instead of working on coming up with ways of quantifying that so we can measure, so we can know how to manage, what we're doing now is having infighting among experts about whose model is better. I don't think that that's a decision for the academics or the scientists. I think that's a decision for the policymakers. And I think the policymakers are bright enough to be able to look at models and say, this model works, this model doesn't, or this one covers my policy goals, this one doesn't. We do that with respect to radio interference analyses all the time. And the last thing I want to say is, I don't want to have a large debate about economic incentives, but people recognize the tragedy of the commons, and they recognize that when you're dealing with a commons, that everyone doesn't have everyone else's interests at heart. And I think about the gold rush in America back in 1849. I promise you, if I were staking my claims in California, I'd be looking out for myself, Quentin, and I wouldn't be worrying about whether or not you can stake out a good spot next to me. I think that's human nature, and that's why we have regulation. We wouldn't need regulation if everyone behaved in the best interest of everyone else.
Thank you, John. I would be delighted actually to continue the conversation, but we really ran out of time. I'm happy actually to have had, maybe you want to have a very quick last comment, since you were...
I was just going to reiterate that I don't think these two things are mutually exclusive, right? We need to be developing guidelines, implementing those, and measuring what we're doing. And I believe there's a reception where we can continue the debate here.
Yes, there was indeed the comment that I was about to make, actually, and the fact that we are here is basically and discussing about this, you know, we are discussing because we do care about sustainability, you know, so, and this is already a good starting point. That the fact that we fight and disagree, you know, that is also part of the process, you know, but it's, for this, we should be more than happy to have this kind of forum where to discuss, you know, and this is the point of the Paris Peace Forum. I thank you all. I apologize with the audience, actually, for not having, but there will be a reception, so there will be plenty of opportunity to continue discussing these points. Thank you so much.